Hi everybody, and welcome to my last camera review of 2017, and considering it's New Year's Eve, it's definitely will be my last one. And today I'm looking at an old Rangefinder camera, and I'm sure you've guessed what model it's going to be, a Canon. And this comes in its original case, and it dates from the 1960s, excuse me. And it is a Canon 7S, and it follows on from a range of Canon 7s. Starts from the Canon 7, the 7S, and ended with the 7S II, or known as the 7SZ. Unfortunately, this camera's got to go back where I've purchased it from because it's got a fault which the seller didn't know about. But it's got a fault which I'll explain in a short while. So I thought I'd get this quick look at it done while I've got it because they are very rare. They only made 16,000 of these from 1965 to 1967, and the model after it, the 7S II, or known as the 7SZ, they only made 4,000. I think the original 7 they made 100,000 or so. But the 7 series started in 1961, and this came out in 65, the 7S. And they made some improvements over the original 7. They included a shoe mount on the top for fitting finders, meters, whatever. Accessories on top rather than having it as an accessory on the old 7. Also, they included a CDS light meter, and that's the cell there. On the original it's a selenium cell, which is not as responsive, especially in low light. So I'm going to have a look at this, and before I have a look, I will say the original lenses that came with this, the Canon Rangefinder lenses, are superb looking. If I show you this, that's the 7S with a 50mm 0.05 f aperture lens, which is absolutely stunning and very expensive and rare if you can get hold of them. But the Canon lenses for this camera are absolutely magnificent, and they use the Leica 39mm screw thread, and I've got a 35mm Voigtlander lens on this one, and the lens simply just screw off on the thread, and it's called the LTM mount. So they used a Leica mount, which stands for Leica thread mount. And obviously, as you know, Leica changed to the M mount, and a lot of people say that this Canon series of 7 rangefinders were the finest thread mount rangefinders ever produced. So I'm just going to go over its features and controls. I won't spend too much time on it, just go over it quickly. So I say the lens just screws on. You don't need to over tighten it until it takes up and stops. And if you look at the rangefinder itself, you've got on the back the viewfinder, and it's a marvellous viewfinder on this. It's 0.8 times magnification, and what you find is when you look through the viewfinder, it gives you like a proper eye view, so it looks like you can basically leave both eyes open as you're using through the viewfinder, which is great obviously for looking at things coming in and out of the area where the photos are going to be taken. And it's really good viewfinder for that, and so as you move it seems to keep the same area. Obviously the viewfinder doesn't change with you changing the lens, so what you get is on top here, and this is a marvellous feature of these cameras, you've got a control on the top for adjusting what frame lines you see when you look through the viewfinder. I've currently got it set on 35 obviously for this Voigtlander lens, so that's 35mm, and you just turn it and you've got a 50mm one. You've got one that's shared at 85 and at 100mm, which uses two separate frame lines for those two focal lengths, and you've also got a 135mm as well. And the good thing is, as well, as you look through the viewfinder, you even see at the bottom it tells you what the number is. It says 35 at the bottom now for this 35mm one, so you've got no doubt what frame line or lens you're using. I say it's really nice and big, bright viewfinder, very nice. Also, look on the back here, you've got a meter check system for switching it on and checking the battery, and the battery fits in the bottom here. I'll not remove the cover, but basically it's a PX625 battery, which should be a 1.3 volt mercury, so you tend to find the meter overreads in these. And this switch here checks the battery. You can see here a little orange needle on this side of the meter, and when you do the check, if the needle goes right up to this end, the battery's okay. I think it should actually stay in scale, but because it's an alkaline battery, it's, like I say, it's over voltage for it really. The other setting, so you've got off, and the other setting is on, which switches the meter on. And as I say, it reads the light through this CDS cell pointing in front, so you've got to be careful not to block that, because as you can see, it obviously affects the needle when you cover that up. And you've got two settings on the meter. You've got a H for high, which is for reading in low light situations, like I am now indoors, and you can flick it, just turn it, and it switches it to L for low. And depending on how you've got that set, depends on how you read this setting on the top. So for the L, which is in white on that there, when it's on L, you use the white aperture settings on there, and when you flick it to H for high, which is in orange, you can see, then obviously you read the aperture from the orange settings on the meter. So for example, in this case, I've got a shutter speed of 30s per second set on the shutter dial, and the needle is saying to use an aperture of f4. So you would set f4 on the lens, and need to focus then, and away you go. And this does obviously tie in with the shutter dial, so as you change the shutter speed, say to 60 per second, you see it adjusts this scaling of the aperture on the bottom accordingly. So you'd have to then select a different aperture if you change the shutter speed. Very nice setup. It does weight well. So you do find in a lot of these, the 7s and 7S's, the meter packs up, because obviously you're talking 1965, you're talking 50 odd year old, so you can expect things not to last forever and ever, but this one seems to be functioning pretty okay actually, considering. So looking at the back as well, you've also got this little button. It's not got anything to tell you what it is, but basically what that does is when you press that in, you can turn the shutter dial and adjust the ASA speed, and you can look through this little window here, and I think I've got it set on 400, you can see, and you can adjust it to different settings, 100, 200, I'm not sure how low it goes, but the highest it goes is actually 400, would you believe? And that adjusts it for the meter, obviously. The shutter dial also has other speeds from T, which is a timed mode, so when you set it on that, it keeps the shutter open until you change to another setting on the shutter dial. B is for bulb, where the shutter stays open until you release the shutter button. And then you've got time speeds. The index, by the way, is this little black line here, you can see. Shutter speeds range from 1 up to 1,000ths of a second. And you also have an X, which is a 1/6 of a second flash sync speed. Looking on the top plate, you have the film wind on, shutter advance, and it cocks the shutter obviously, and it's got nice, not too long a stroke actually on that. And around the shutter button itself, you've got a lock feature. If you want it, just turn that to the little red dot. I don't know if you can see that little red dot, and that locks the shutter button. or you can flick it to R, which releases the inside sprocket, so you can rewind the film via this crank and lever here, which is quite small as you can see, and that is an improvement they made on the 7SZ or 7S2. This rewind lever is quite larger, I would say probably around the size of this dial, and you could then rewind the film after setting it to R on the collar there. Rewind the film back into the cartridge, and to open the back you first unlock it with that key there, and then you pull on this catch at the bottom and it flicks open the back. And the good thing about this camera is, as you can see, it's used as a standard flick back system rather than the awkward Leica system for inserting the film. Obviously there is more chance of light getting onto the film in this type of system, but I've never known any problems with these type of film loading systems at all, so shouldn't have a problem. The film slots in onto that spool there, and you pull it across, put it into put it into the slot on the take-up spool. Make sure the film sits into the sprockets here before winding it on, firing a shot, and you can close the back. Take up any slack on the rewind crank, and obviously advance it. It does have a shutter film count, which is here, which resets when you open the back to S, as you can see, and then you'd wind that on, firing the shutter until you get to 1, and then you're ready to take 0. Then your next one is 1, and you can wind it on and take your first shot. Just looking in the back again, I'll show you the shutter curtain, because it's slightly unusual. It's made of stainless steel. The Leica ones and a lot of cameras use cloth ones. This is stainless steel, and you do find a lot of them have wrinkles or creases in the shutter. This has got a very slight mark, but it's actually very good. That's the second shutter curtain, which just has a little rubbing mark on it, nothing to worry about. So the curtains in this are actually excellent. I've seen some where it's really creased, and you can even get them with holes in. And a lot of it is down to users actually putting the fingers or thumbs into that and damaging it. Just close the back up again. You've got the film pressure plate there, of course. Also on the top plate, I mentioned you've got the film counter. You've got a little dial that turns when you move the film advance. Now, the problem with this camera is that I mentioned earlier it has to go back. Unfortunately, the slower shutter speeds don't work. It works down to 1/8 of a second. You notice how quiet the shutter is. It's a very quiet shutter, even though it's stainless steel blades. But if I turn this down to 1/4, see, it's not actually fired. Oh, it's just fired now. Obviously, that was much longer than it should be. If you turn it down to 1 second, it just doesn't work at all. So the 1 second, 2 second, half a second and 1/4 of a second don't really fire the shutter correctly. It seems to work correctly from 1/8 of a second up. So that is another fault to watch out for with these. And it doesn't actually make it unusable, because I would say 99% of your shots are going to be at speeds probably above 15th, if not a 30th of a second, especially if you're handheld in. So if you're using a tripod, you'd use those slow speeds anyway. But the reason I'm sending it back is because I'm looking ahead thinking, well, if I come to sell this camera, it'll be worth a lot less with that problem than what I paid for it. So it makes sense to me to send it back. Looking at the front, you've got a self-timer. If I just set a speed, you can set the self-timer before or after you cock the shutter, and you just fire the actual shutter button and it counts down the spring-loaded self-timer and fires the shutter at the end, obviously. Here at the front is the window that has the rangefinder spot on it. It's like an orange square spot in the centre, and it superimposes that onto your viewfinder. And basically, as you focus the lens, usually the lenses have a little lever on like this or something. As you focus the lens, the rangefinder spot comes into line with the centre spot, and that's when you know it's in focus, because obviously things don't look out of focus through the viewfinder. You're not looking through the lens, you're just looking through this window. But a lot of people like rangefinder focusing. It's not good for action as regards quick focusing, especially at close ranges, but a lot of people use zone focusing, where you set a narrow aperture, say of f8, and use the depth of field scale here to set a range, say from 20, say about 30 feet. Set that against your f8, and you get down to about then 5-6 feet range. So anything in that range would be in focus. That's what a lot of people use rangefinder, rather than focusing on the spot for every single subject. So looking at the top plate, you've got the only other thing you've got is this telling you where the film plane is. I mentioned the cold shoe. It's not a hot shoe, as you can see. If you're using a flash, by the way, put a flash on the top, you would connect it to this sync socket on the side, which would fire the flash for you. Looking at the bottom, so you've got the battery compartment, a tripod socket, and like I said, the back opening, and you've got some strap lugs here on the side. So a very classy looking camera, very hard to find. Like I say, it took me a long while to get this, and I'm really saddened that it's got to go back, but there you go. I'll have to look for another one. I hope you've enjoyed this video, the last one of 2017, and I hope you all have a prosperous and happy new year, and I'll catch you in the new year. Catch you then soon.